I'm assuming this is going to be something we only want done once. I'm going to go ahead and set it as no dependencies so it doesn't just continuously fetch the data.
Nice.
Let's see, we'll do this in a try catch box. Do a simple console error for the error. Uh, bu- 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 um, Now since I'm doing this in here, I'm going to have to make it a function. Data async. All right. Um, bang.
And by the way, I know that oftentimes people don't memorize the native way to do this using fetch. If you need any help with that syntax, I'm happy to guide you if that's what you plan on using to fetch the data.
Yeah, I do plan on using fetch. I'm trying to remember because I just recently did this, but I would admit to have used some of the autofill.
No, that's
So
fine. How about you try
yeah,
as best you can, and I can guide you through the rest. So fetch actually returns a promise. So fetch will return one promise, which will be a readable stream, I believe. And then you'll have to await that and then transform it to JSON. But yeah, you can like write out what you know, and I can help you with the rest.
right. Actually, if I'm thinking about this right, I think I just approached the try catch in the wrong order. I think I actually need to put the try catch inside the fetch data and not outside of it.
Oh,
Just
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that.
need
Sure.
to get rid of. Actually, no, just to keep my own sanity, I'm going to get rid of the whole thing and just do it over. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah, no worries.
Sometimes when I'm going through problems, if I get into a section where I've made a foolish little error like that, I find it easier to just go ahead and as long as it's minimal code, it's not too much. Um, I find it easier to just go ahead and erase that section and
Mhm.
retype it. Because what I've found is that if I don't do that, what I'll end up doing a lot of times is I'll accidentally put something within the wrong bracket or some small little mistake that's easy to miss just because I was trying to fix on top of an error instead of just
Agreed.
erasing the area and kind of coming back to it.
Yeah, I totally feel you. Sometimes it's easier to start over. Okay, cool. So you're catching there. Good. Now time to actually get the data.
Yes. So we'll have data equals, or actually, no. Um, so I don't want to reuse what I've already set up here.
Yeah, and then and as a reminder, if you're using the native fetch API, the global fetch function, it's attached to the window object. Fetch
Hmm.
returns the response that you'll need to then transform to JSON. If that's helpful
Right,
for aiming your
right,
variable.
right, right. Um, not sure data. And the first thing I need is the API,
And I've stored that into a const for the sake of
API
time.
URL. Nice. That makes life easy.
Yeah, I yeah, don't want to be typing that out.
And
Actually, that's it. Fetch will default to a GET request. So all you need to do is put in the API URL.
oh yeah, I'm used to using the methods and all that, but you're right. The
Yeah.
default is that. So
So and then
then
so what fetch will return is a promise, and then initial data. Um, that initial data will have a .json method that you'll need to then await again to get the actual data.
you know what? That's one thing I think I actually forgot though.
Yep. Excellent catch.
And then I need to do const result equals uh let me see. How do I do this again? Uh,
Initial data will have a method called JSON on it.
paste.
And you'll have to invoke that. Yeah, like that. And that's also a promise you'll need to They don't need to be
Right.
resolved.
And then from there, let me check one thing real quick. I want to look
Sure.
at the data the way it's coming in again.
Hmm.
Okay, so the data is going to come in as an array, and there's no. Now, when the data is fetched, I'm not expecting like a success message followed by the array of objects. It's just going to be the array of objects, correct?
I believe so. We
Okay.
should confirm, but almost certain.
So what I would do then is go ahead and set data to results.
Yep.
And
Seems reasonable.
let's see, display name, email, website is applicable link. So actually one of the first things I would normally do, just to make sure I'm not getting too much into the weeds,
Mhm.
um, before I do all this is I would go ahead and just do a quick console log, to see what the first thing in the data is, because, I don't obviously don't want to read through the entire list, but I would normally do something like this so that I could come in. Oops, did make one mistake there.
Yeah, I think that also that says console.data that
Yeah, it does, doesn't
like zero.
it? Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I think there's just as a heads up, there's an issue in your use effect hook. You're missing one small piece where you've
Yep.
yep,
Fetch
excellent. There you go.
data.
Boom.
Yeah, that will actually do it. Um, Now I'm used to using dev tools,
Hmm.
so I'm not
And
quite used to where the console would log in this. Could you help
it's
me out with
actually
that?
within there. So if you I believe if you go to the bottom of the screen to the
Mhm.
right, you'll see like an ability to open up
Over
the
here?
in the yeah, in the like the you can open up the logs, but I think it's actually there's dev oh, there's a little box right there too. I think that says like dev tools, something like that, next to the URL. The component inspector and preview console.
Let's
That
check.
may be what I'm looking for. And this is essentially what you'd see in a regular web browser.
Alright, so we got an undefined back. I
Undefined.
didn't that. So let's see where I messed up at then. Okay, we're fetching the data, setting the data as result. Looks like I'm awaiting it properly.
Yeah, how would you
Student
normally like debug when something like that goes wrong? Like you awaited the fetch to the API URL, and then
So honestly, one of the things that I do a lot is I refer back to some of my older programs, some of the other stuff I've written, um, because I know that I've used stuff like this over and over again. So if I run into an issue where I'm like, "Oh, this isn't quite working out right," one of the things I would likely do before going into a deep Google dive or Stack Overflow, or ChatGPT or something like that would just be to review one of my own projects that I've already done to see, okay, where did this go wrong at, and what have I done differently here?
I think one way to do this, like without doing that yet, is just to console.log initial data. I know there's probably not an issue at all, but there's a space between fetch and API URL. But potentially console logging some of the low hanging fruit, like the API URL and the initial data after, would could at least let us know, like, is any initial data even coming back? So this might give us a little clue here.
Okay, so the initial data is coming back.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So initial data is coming back and we await
Actually, hold
it.
on a minute. What's going on right here? Let's
PWA, blah, 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 extension. That could be that could be a red herring, could be completely unrelated.
all right.
Yeah. The undefined, undefined, undefined. We await. And if you console.log, so open up one of those. Oh, okay. Interesting. So if let's go back and make sure the URL, we're using a URL that should be returning await fetch, and we await initial data.json. And can you console.log the results? Let's see if we get those. And it looks like initial data actually is returning something. So maybe we need to just see what's going on there.
Let me get rid of the two console logs we're not using just so we get cleaner data.
Yeah, maybe that's useful.
Nothing.
And refresh if necessary, potentially.
There we go.
Perfect. There we go. So we are getting back what we expect. Um, yeah. So now it's more a matter of working with this data. So you're setting the data to the results, and you're now using a return statement. Return statement is going to be undefined because data at index 0 for whatever is
Hmm,
undefined. But
it's
um,
weird. I would have expected that to actually come back with something, but apparently not.
yeah, and there may be a reason that the return statement is not what's it called? It's not updating based on the state of the UI. But yeah, I think it looks like we can at least be sure that set data is in fact working. So it looks like we have what we expect, and now we can potentially move on with displaying the users.
Okay. I tell you what, just to make sure I'm understanding how the data's coming through, I do want to check one more thing with the console log.
I would generally put the console log above this and not in the return statement.
Whoops.
That would that would give us an indication that in fact the set state does trigger a re-render, and the re-render would then reflect the most current state of this component. So if you put like console.log data, and if you just do console.log data and then you get rid of your other console log in there, we can be pretty certain that things are working the right way. So you get rid of the one on line 19 as well. There we go.
Yeah.
So that
Coming
makes
through.
sense. Yeah, it triggers a re-render, and I believe putting it. I've never really put a console log in a return statement generally. Um, and I'm assuming that there's something there that is not working obviously not working as expected. But
Let me see
yeah,
if it's the, just so I know how to get each individual thing. I want to try this just real fast because
sure,
if that returns undefined,
we're good to go. Yep.
yeah, which
And that
is
and the reason it returns, are you clear on the reason it returns undefined? Or like why do you think it might return undefined initially?
initially because there's nothing set. It has to actually go through the process and get the data, set the data, and then do it. So my assumption is that when the page first renders, it's still waiting on all this to clear through,
Mhm.
which means that data hasn't been actually instantiated yet. So set data hadn't been called yet, which means the data hasn't been set, which means it returns undefined first.
Exactly. So the whole point of React being that it will react to the changes in the state. There's a few things that can trigger those updates. Um, what are some ways you can trigger a re-render? Like what are some of the most common ways that a React component knows, hey, it's time to re-render?
Within the use effect, I can assign in a dependency like a button click or something along those lines so that every time that it's clicked, it could refetch the use effect, which would reset the state. And any type of resetting of the state is going to cause a re render too.
Yeah. Prop changes, state changes, these can trigger re-renders, the most likely culprits for it. So cool. So now we're updating the state. We get undefined because it was originally undefined. Now it's been set, and now it re-renders, and we get our list of data. So now what are we going to do?
Oh, next on the instructions, display name, email, and website as a clickable list of all users. All right. So if we're going to do this for all users, then I would end up using map. Um, data.map. We'll use user and this. Let's see. I'm going to return another fragment.
Nice. Just
And
curious. I would use a fragment too. Any reason you're using a fragment rather than div?
Um, but I just feel like when you're using fragments, you get what you actually want in instead of having kind of div soup where everything is a div. So
Yeah.
I don't need a div to be there, then I'd rather use it as a fragment, and then I could just go through and put whatever I actually want to come out of it.
Mhm.
So for example, for this, I might do, um, just 3 sections where it's either, P, paragraph tag or something like that, and I just want it to say user for it, but I don't want it the P within a div because there's nothing else I plan on doing with that div.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, good point. Having a bunch of divs polluting the document might not be the
It
best.
No, it just to me, it seems a lot cleaner to read when you just have that fragment and whatever you want within the fragment instead of adding unnecessaries to it.
For sure.
Alright, let's see. So we need name, email, and website is clickable.
Mhm. And don't worry
Any
about the
preference?
styling or anything at this point. We're gonna just get only the data on there. If you
Um, well, you have it set off as a list. Do you mind whether it's actually an unordered list, ordered list, or whether it's simply a set of
so I was thinking like
information?
a table type, but so not ordered list at all. If anything, just an unordered list. Ideally, it could be later styled into like what looks to be a table. Doesn't need to actually follow like an HTML table structure, but
All right.
ideally it's styled as a table later if we wanted to.
So for now, what I would try then is, whoops, um, I would just do something like name followed by user dot, and it looks like it is coming out as name. So I'll try that. Uh, uh, and you said email. Oh, user dot email,
Okay.
and then I would do an a I'd do this as, let me check real quick the website link, how that
Sure.
presents. All right, so that's going to present as that. So yeah, that should be fine to say
And the
user.
website, by the way, they simply give us the name and like the domain name. It'd be nice if we added like HTTPS or
Roger that.
how about just www in front of it? You know,
Oops, not that way, dummy. Oh, actually, no, that's right. That is what I want to do.
I think you can do it. Yeah, you can do it that way.
www dot,
Mhm.
and I'm going to wrap that up nice and pretty.
Excellent.
Do you want the www on the user side showing as well,
Nah,
or
nah,
okay?
we can just put the website in there, but that way at least the href is potentially better. Potentially doesn't cause any issues. Cool. So now we have that. Excellent. So let's see what it looks like. And I think I see one small issue.
Yeah, there's got to be something I did wrong.
Yeah. And it's in your map function. You have a map function, but it's not doing one small thing.
Oh, let's try this.
Yeah. Not returning anything. Yep. And this is all yeah, I'm glad I hate when that happens because sometimes it's really hard to like tell where the things are. Um, I think that maybe there's a syntax error. Yeah. I would uh command Z or control Z to get a couple moves back and then let's refactor the return statement. We could make this potentially an implicit return. Might be might be easier. So you see these two brackets, turn those into um open and close parentheses. So turn that one to an open parenthesis, the one you're currently on. and then turn the one on line 39, the first one, into an open parentheses or close one. Then I think we're good. Let's see. Better work. There we go. I'm talking about. And are you familiar with the idea of like the implicit versus explicit return? Like what?
Um, so yes and no. I don't tend to use it with the bigger sections like this. Normally, if I'm going to do the implicit return, it would just be like one line. I guess that's why I automatically defaulted to wanting to do return with the parentheses.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, and there's no like it's just shorter syntax. There's no benefit to using one or the other, but it's more helpful for me that way. Like if I have a return, sometimes I get confused about where to put the additional bracket. It's just, I mean, this causes
it's just cleaner your way.
brain melt. Yeah. But
Yeah.
cool. Now we're in this part. Excellent. So now we have the names, we have the emails. They're clickable. Can you click on one to see what happens? Look at that. Excellent. Cool. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Um, Now let's get to the next piece of this assignment. So we're doing pretty good on time. We only have about 10 to 15 minutes left to be transparent. So I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for you to ask any questions. Let's see how far we can get and kind of walk me through how we could add some filtering capability. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of like the UI piece of this. So right under H1, I'd like us to have a, you got to go back one, I think, back.
Yeah, I'm trying. It's not letting me.
Oh, lame. If you just
Oh, you know
remove
what?
that, yeah, if you remove that, you should
Yeah,
be good, I think. Cool.
there we go.
So let's put under the H1 an input. And I'd like it so that when a user, we have this list of data, but it'd be nice to be able to filter it. And it'd be nice to be able to filter by name or email. For the interest of time, let's just filter by name. So a user could type in a series of characters and we'll filter the list based on those characters. If any of those characters are a piece of the name, for example, if I type LE, I would expect to see Leanne Graham in my in the list of people that are now in the screen. If I typed uh, GRA, I'd also expect to see Leanne Graham because her first and last, I mean, her last name includes GRA and her first name includes LEA. And if I typed in ERV, I'd expect to see Irvin Howell. And this should be case insensitive, shouldn't respect casing at all.
Okay. So I know I'm going to need a basic input box.
Mhm.
Uh,
And I think the inputs are kind of okay, cool. Sometimes I notice like the styling can make the input box weird to see. So if an input type box and like, for example, if you typed LEA, we filter by all people that have LEA within the name.
all right. So first, I'm going to need another state to hold what's actually being put in there.
Sure. Yeah. Could definitely work. Are you having, oh, you're having the state for, okay. I get what you're doing here.
Uh, there we go. And we'll make the value of that input the input. Uh,
Let me ask you this, and also for the interest of time,
all
is there a
right.
reason you would need to store the value of the input box? Because what we really want to do is update the list of users based on what's being typed into the box at any given
That's
time.
true. So, uh, this isn't something I've done before. What I've done in the past is I've used an input box to um, basically perform a call with that information. So I'm trying to kind of think through as I'm doing it. So I'm falling back on some of the ways that I've done things in the past, which is why I've put the input box as a state. But now that you're saying that, I'm trying to think of like different ways we could go through the data and filter it on change. But the other thing I noticed too is that my input box isn't allowing me to actually put anything in. So I was trying to see if
Oh,
putting the value in
I
there would let
believe
me.
that's but I like what you said. Sorry to cut you off. I like what you said. You said on change to filter something. So maybe let's just start with the on change and and do something on that on change, because that way we can capture what a person is typing in and then do something based on that value.
Okay.
So like maybe you have like the on change event, like you kind of said exactly what I would kind of approach this. Of course, there's many ways to do it. I think the way you're doing it could totally work, but I think for the interest of time, we can get a little further if we go this route of listening for an on change event.
So we'll go ahead and make the on change in the interest of staying with
Mhm.
everything I've done before. We use handle search instead of just search for that.
Gotcha.
Um, and let's see, I want to take input. I'm trying to think of how I'll go about this because I know I'm going to need to go through every user name within
Mhm.
data to go through and do this.
Now that value equals input box, that's also the reason why you're not able to update the state because you've attached it, you've bound it to a state. So I don't think we even need any state there. I think we did actually what you suggested, which is on change equals handle search, and then we'll do some stuff in there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
to get
I'll
rid
just
of
get
that
rid.
value and just yeah.
I thought for a second you were talking about that input. I was threw me for a second.
Well,
Sorry about that.
the and in there, yeah. So we can get rid of that. And then on change, we'll call that function.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how I would go through this. So I kind of know how I would set up like,
Mhm.
the initial stuff like this, because that would be how I'd set the input box up and the um that we're gonna need input dot value because
Mhm.
that's gonna act as the effect or the change. We'll make that just be uh, user input dot value. So if I'm thinking about this right, that will set the user input to whatever the person is actively typing in. Um,
Be input dot target dot value. So
oh, you're right. You're right.
on change, it'd be like the event object and the event object, yeah, target dot value.
Yeah.
And then from there, this is where the interesting piece will happen.
And I guess actually that's kind of a more standard way to put this.
It is, and I don't, you can rename the argument whatever makes the most sense to you in that case.
All right. So what I want to do then is I want to filter. You said to filter by name, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But you want to filter by any part of the name, any without it being capital or not capital.
Yeah, we don't want to take into account capitalization. And again, for the interest of time, we can forget about that. If we can just filter by first and last name, I think that the capitalization is pretty trivial to figure out. Otherwise,
Well, and since it's the data is coming through as just a single string for the first and last name, uh, I'm trying to think about this in a section of time too, because I know that I can. So let me just talk through what I would do before I do
sure, yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Um, if I wanted to do by first and last name, I have to be able to actually separate the first and last name within the name. So I would have to create something that actually represented the two instead of the one. If I wanted to just do it by a straight name, then I could just try to filter by the initial letters. Um, but if I'm thinking about this right, both of those would be very, very different things to do.
Um, I think that you have a good point, actually, that you're right, because the name comes back as one single string. We'd have to like split it and do some stuff. So let's just treat the entire name as like we won't worry about that piece. If you type LEA or even NNE, you would expect Leanne Graham to come back. And in this case, if you type E, then basically everybody would come back because we have Irvin, Clementine, Leanne. They all have an E in their name. So basically, if that string that we type in is included in the name, we'll say it's sufficient to filter them into our list.
All right. So no, that's not going to be correct. What I want to do is I want to do data filter and I want to filter by value, I guess. So I want to filter by eat. mm, just
You
getting
have
this
the right
out.
idea for sure.
Well, it's been a while since I've done a filter, just full disclosure. So I'm
That's
trying to
fine.
remember the correct setup for it.
So filter will run over each item in the array, in this case, data, and it will take in some statement function that is going to bring back a true or false value. The value is true, it will filter it in. If it's false, it'll filter it out.
Includes
Yeah. Yeah.
user input.
And you're using I, you're doing over, yeah, data.filter, and then you pass in the argument for like a single element in the array. So in this case, data.filter, you'd say I. I would be, it's a bit of a nitpick. I is an unconventional name because it's would
Yeah, I
it
was
would
trying to think of like an actual good name for it, but I feel like if I did name, because that was the first thing that jumped in my head, and then I was like, no, because then it's name.name. That doesn't read very cleanly. So, and then in the interest of time, I was like, you know what, just put I so that something's there to get it started.
totally fine. That yeah, that works. So it means it definitely works. The naming convention is a little different. It might
Yeah,
be
it's
confusing
ugly.
later. We could always fix that.
I'll be the first one to admit that's an ugly way to do it.
Whatever. We got okay. We got the initial logic. Great. Now in the next couple minutes, how would you, and we don't have time to write the code, that's fine. But how would you then like type something in and you'll see obviously that this will not work.
Yeah, this isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Um, so I need to be able to return something from that, and so that's going to filter it down to where everything is.
Mhm.
But I would also need to change what's being shown instead of doing it based on the data. I need to do it based on what's being returned to this. So
I think for now, I think to we one way to do this would be to set data to what's returned because what does a filter return? What does a filter method return?
so the filter method is going to return an array.
Mhm.
But I don't want to. So the reason I'm not jumping to set the data as that is because then we erase everything that's been
Yes.
set, making it to where nothing else can really be done. Or in other words, it's just going to constantly trim the list down. So I guess ideally I would have it set to a whole separate um, state.
Yeah, that would definitely be a way to do it. Like have two separate pieces of state. Another way potentially would be in your fetch data to set like a flag within each one, like is visible, is not visible. Like add a new property to each object, and that way you
Yeah.
could toggle that property. But
So
another
my
way is to have two different pieces of state as well.
my initial thought right now would be that I would have it set to where um, I would set it to map, but I would do two setups. I would have it to one where if somebody had put in a search, then it would display just the part that was searched. But if not, it would display the full list, kind of like what you see in most search engines, to where you'll get a full display of something if no parameters are
Mhm.
put in. Um, so
One
I would
way to
end up
do
using.
that. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I would end up using something. I'm just going to kind of throw it in the middle here, but I would end up using something along the lines of um, uh, duh, 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 we'll just call it specific data for the argument of this. If specific data is true, then display, you know, name, email, etc. Of that. And then if not, I would display everything that's down here and just have that all displayed as the entire list. In other words, not doing the specific data. So it would have to go const specific data. Is that specific data? Use state.
Okay.
And then I would have the handle search feed specific data. So the
Ex-
specific data comes up as being true. In other words, something actually being in there, then it would display the individual name, email of just those people. And
Mhm.
otherwise, I would kind of revert back to what this initial one is, to where it just goes through all the data and does it.
Okay, yeah, that's certainly a way to do it. I think keeping two pieces of state is the way to do it. Um, I yeah, I think that there's pros and cons to any approach you'd use. But now we've kind of come to the close. Excellent work, by the way. I appreciate you kind of walking through me through your thought pattern while you're doing this, and also like explaining some core Java, like some core React and JavaScript concepts along the way. I think that's really helpful. So kind of breaking character for a bit. Now we can go back, stop sharing, and we'll go back to the final reason. How'd that feel? How was doing like coding on the spot?
I think honestly, the coding on the spot part isn't too bad. The time limit, that's
Yeah.
something for me, because I'm used to being able to kind of code at my own pace and
Mhm.
look up stuff as I need to. Um, and I won't say that I necessarily miss the autofill for coding, but I can definitely say it's something that I lean on more than I want to. So I would want to kind of go back and make sure that I'm carefully reviewing what I'm coding and not just letting VS Code tell me what to do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because I love using shortcuts, autopilot. But speed is the name of the game in these interviews. It's really hard to do these tasks and things like that. I'd say you did pretty good overall. Like overall, like you were really good at like walking me through the process. Some people clam up and they just don't say anything. And even though we didn't get to the very end, there's always technical issues, by the way. Like there's always some little issue. Facebook, Google, they have much more standardized ways of testing. They have like their specific tool they're using. But even then, I've had technical issues with people. I had to like reschedule or do another call later with even the top tech companies. So it's one of those things, like time is a killer, and,
Yes.
a lot of times you don't really have to make up for it. But it really
One,
depends. Mhm.
I think that's kind of what really hit me with the autofill too, is that it was like, oh, I'm used to coding at a certain pace. Now that I
Yep,
have to manually type all this stuff in, it slowed down my entire process. So it wasn't just a matter of knowing what comes next. It was a matter of actually inputting what comes next.
yep. Yeah, exactly. And I'll be honest, even at the end, like, we have a couple minutes left, and this is generally how the interviews go. In the last, like, 2 or 3 minutes, they'll be like, "Do you have any questions for me?" And so, like, what were some of the questions that you wanted to ask?
So there's some standard questions like, what did the previous person in this position leave for? Why did they choose to leave this position?
Sure.
Another question would have been, what is something you would like to see improved within the company, and how can this position help facilitate that improvement?
It's a really good
Uh,
one.
and then one of the biggies is, what does onboarding look like? If this position is offered to me, what is the process actually going to be of me coming on, learning the tech stack, learning the entire code base, my section within the code base, and so on and so forth. Because obviously coming into a new company, I want to know that I at least have enough time to figure out which way's left, which way's right before they're like, here, do everything. So onboarding would be an important question for me.
Yeah. I think first of all, these are all great questions. Second of all, I think that onboarding is generally lacking at like every company. It's just not good.
I've found that to be true in every industry.
It sucks. Yeah. My personal favorite question though, like the one I like to use the most is like the one you did the second question you had, like what's one thing you would improve? Because then it does a little bit of a mind hack to the person where they're thinking, if you're saying what would you improve, and they're seeing you and they're thinking, what would I improve? It can this person be that key to unlock this thing that I want to improve. When you have people talking about things like the future and you're kind of associating yourself with like a ideal future state, I think that can be a powerful thing to lean into.
Well, and for me personally, that's something I'm always very interested in, because when I look for a company, I'm not looking for a company to stay 6 months at, a year at, whatever, and then bounce immediately. I'm looking for growth. I'm looking, and that actually was like my last question would be, what opportunities for growth and advancement are within this company?
Another good
Because
one.
that's what I want to see. I understand that a lot of people have that job hop mentality when it comes to
Mhm.
trying to get pay raise after pay raise. And while there is some validity in that, I think there's also validity in just growing as a developer within a company and making it to where you actually understand what's going on within that company And I don't think that's a 6 month to a year process. I think that's something that could take a couple years minimum to actually be able to realize whether this is the place you want to sit at for a while or
Mhm.
whether it's someplace you should be looking at leaving.
Totally agree, and I actually haven't taken that advice as much as I should. I noticed that there is a limit to return on job hopping. I job hop for pretty aggressively for the first 5, 6 years. Now I'm staying in this company, current one, and I plan on staying here for a while. But at some point, unless you're growing or either in finance, like, getting more money, or you're growing in as titles and like your overall scope of work, probably time to leave. But you're
Yeah.
right, like, it's hard to get really good at something if you're just job hopping around, because then you can kinda get into this weird mid-level junior stage where you're just kinda like mid-level for a really, really long time. 'Cause you haven't seen the errors of your ways yet. If you, like, make a big change somewhere and you leave too early, you don't know if it was a catastrophe or not, because sometimes it
Yeah.
takes months or years to really see the effects of what you've done. Anyway, I know we're basically at time, but, it's just some general feedback. One, really good on the, like, thinking and articulating what you're thinking as you're doing it. I would say even lean further into that with like JavaScript concepts and things like that. I like to take on the teacher role if I'm doing an interview a bit, because sometimes the person actually may not be a JavaScript or React developer. Like, make no assumptions. Say, I'm using a map. By the way, a map does XYZ. It
Okay.
shows good JavaScript knowledge. And
So more than just explaining what you're doing, but explaining kind of the logic behind what you're doing and kind of, the then step by step details of what that thing actually does.
I like that, because then it kinda also shows the person, oh, they can not only do the practical stuff, they know a little bit about the conceptual things as well. And it doesn't have to be like, the person may know quite a lot more than you, but maybe they don't. And either way, it's just nice to just display your knowledge. And then the other thing, of course, the time. That was the biggest thing. The assignment we did together, the challenge we did, is so representative of the kind of challenges you're gonna get. Um, Timing yourself while doing something like that, and just kind of playing with weird exercises you could do within the list, like maybe clicking on somebody in the race, or clicking on something and it moves. Using real-time data, WebSockets is another really popular one, because real-time data has become so ubiquitous. And then the one big thing I would do is Cramp.com. Cramp.com, free site. I used to use it a lot to do mock interviews with people, because it gets you that used to like timing. Like,
Okay.
okay, I got time to finish this. The pressure's on, getting watched at the same time. But you did very well, man. Excellent job. Thanks for
Thank
doing
you.
this. Yeah, thank you.
No, no pressure or anything. I saw the post you put on Instagram and I was like, ah, crap.
I appreciate it, man. It's not easy doing this. I mean, like, I get nervous giving interviews, so I know how it is to be on the other end. It's nerve-wracking.
Well,
Everybody
and
looking
what,
at code
to
while
be
you're
honest with
coding.
you,
Tough.
that's held all the pressure of a real interview for me. So it was one of those things where I was like really kind of sitting here going, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Let's make sure we actually do a good job with this. I don't want to do, a halfway. I want to present it as if it's a job on the other end of this line waiting for me. And I really appreciate you letting me come through and do this because I think this is a great learning experience to experience firsthand. I'm sure people that watching it are going to get experience off of it. Um, but it's a whole different option when you're sitting in the chair.
Oh yeah, man. When you're in that seat, it's like unpredictable. It's kind of fun, but also like really nerve wracking. Well, anyway, hey, thanks a lot, man. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
this, and I'm sure I'll see you in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you again.